My brother locked me in the basement and left me begging for help as the house burned. Now they beg my forgiveness, but my last act made them kneel. Hi, I'm Barbara. They said it was just a joke. That locking me in the basement while the house caught fire was some twisted lesson in resilience. It builds character, my mother said as smoke curled under the door. I survived, but they rewrote the story. Said I panicked, said I did it to myself. Then they cut me out of the will, tried to sell my house, even filed a lawsuit for emotional distress. Now they're on the porch knocking, asking to be let back in. But after everything, who do you let in when they once left you behind a locked door? I knew the smell before I even stepped through the door. Lemon pledge, old carpet, and forced cheer. My mom always believed a clean house made a clean conscience. I wasn't so sure anymore. The front room looked like a Hallmark card had vomited all over it. Balloons in lavender and gold, a cake shaped like a gift box, Isolde's 35th birthday banner strung across the fireplace like a crown, and everyone smiling too hard, too wide. I walked in, clutching the bottle of wine I'd brought out of politeness, not intention. Barbara, Mom called from across the room like she hadn't seen me in months, though she had texted 2 days ago, demanding I show up. Look who made it. Isn't that wonderful? Sure is, I replied. My voice even, my jaw tighter than necessary. I could feel it already. The dance, the performative closeness, the unspoken reminders. Every fork was aligned like a soldier. Every napkin folded with surgical precision. This wasn't a party. It was a presentation. Dorian came over, drink in hand, grinning. Hey, sis, you look tired. I smiled without teeth. Good to see you, too. 15 minutes in, the lights dimmed and someone wheeled in a screen. Oh, no, not the slideshow. Time for memory lane, Mom announced, clapping too eagerly. I made for the edge of the room, but froze halfway through my second sip of sparkling water. There it was. Slide 3, a painting, watercolor, blue and violet storm clouds over a field of gold. I knew every stroke, every single brush line. I had painted it when I was 12. It had hung in my room for a year before it mysteriously vanished. On screen, the caption read, Dorian's first art award, age 12. My stomach turned. Mom leaned in, her voice bright. Wasn't it cute when Dorian was our little Picasso? I stared at the screen, at my painting, at the lie beaming in pixels. I remembered crying when it disappeared. They said maybe I had misplaced it. Maybe I was being dramatic. I remembered believing them. I took a breath. It's beautiful, I said. Nobody noticed the shake in my voice. I whispered inside my head. I wonder if Picasso ever got punched in the gut by his own last name. I left the room and made my way to the kitchen, needing a minute. It was empty, thank God. I opened a cabinet to grab napkins, knocked over a small tin in the process. It clattered. The lid popped open. Inside was a bunch of old name tags from family reunions. I picked one up. Barbara, the liability. My hand went cold. The ink had faded, but not enough to disguise Mom's handwriting. My chest ached. I could still hear her voice years ago. Don't wear pink, Barbara. It makes you look unstable. I stared at the label. That was never a joke. That was a verdict. I slipped the tag back slower than I wanted to. When I returned to the party, my plate stayed empty. I walked through the crowd like a ghost with lipstick on. Dorian was retelling some exaggerated story about a camping trip where he rescued a raccoon. Isolde laughed like it was the best story she'd ever heard. My mom pulled me aside. Sweetheart, she whispered. Try to look less tense. It's Isolde's day. I turned to her, voice quiet but edged. You labeled me a liability when I was 12. You think I've been tense since last week? She blinked, smiled like nothing had been said, and walked away. That's when I knew I wasn't here for family. I was here to remember why I didn't come around anymore. I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, washed my face twice. I didn't cry. I'd used up all those tears a decade ago. From my purse, I pulled out a sealed envelope labeled "In case I'm gaslit again." Inside was a printed email from the county property office. Ownership of the family home. My name only. I slipped the envelope back into my bag. I hadn't come to fight, but if they started it this time, I was staying until the end. My mom's voice pierced through the bathroom door. "Barbara, could you come sign something real quick?" I opened the bathroom door and was greeted by the smell of buttercream frosting and the murmured clinks of glasses. The house wasn't loud, too much tension for noise, but there was an unnatural calm, like a gathering of people waiting for a verdict they already knew. I stepped into the dining room. Everyone was seated now, their faces turned toward me like I'd interrupted something sacred. Verena stood at the head of the table, beaming, the kind of smile that made my stomach twist. "Sweetheart," she said, her tone dipped in artificial honey. "We want to make today memorable. Just one thing to wrap up." On the table beside the birthday cake, pink, glossy, two-tiered, and too much, was a manila folder. Its presence was casual, as if it belonged between the salad tongs and the gift bags. "Before we cut the cake," she continued, "we thought this would be symbolic." Dorian swirled a drink in his glass, not even looking up. Isolde clapped, overly eager. I hadn't seen her this animated since high school cheer tryouts. Verena opened the folder and slid the contents toward me. "It's just paperwork to make the house official. Co-ownership, you know, a legacy gesture." I stared at the top line. "Transfer of property from Barbara E., last name, to Isolde V., last name." My fingers hovered over the page. "You want me to give Isolde the house?" Verena laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Don't be so literal. Just share it. It's her 30th. Think of it as a gesture of love." I flipped through the rest. There was no clause, no repayment terms, no temporary agreement, just a straight transfer. Tucked behind it was a non-disclosure agreement and an addendum that read, "Barbara acknowledges past mental health concerns and agrees not to pursue liability against immediate family members." I looked up slowly. "Is this a joke?" Dorian chuckled under his breath. "Here we go." Verena stepped closer. "Barbara, healing only works if we stop holding on to the past." My hands were shaking, not from confusion, from clarity. Before I could speak, Dorian stood, grabbed a slice of cake, and smirked. "Maybe she's still mad about the fire." Isolde laughed too loud, then covered her mouth. Verena gave Dorian a sharp glance, but said nothing. I stepped back. "You locked me in a basement." "I was 14. Dorian shrugged. "It was a dare." "I thought you left." "You didn't even look for me," I said. He rolled his eyes and before I could move, shoved the cake straight into my face. Gasps exploded around the room. Someone's phone clicked. Someone else laughed. I stood there, frosting dripping down my chin, and in that second, the room blurred. Smoke, the door slamming, the heat building under the door frame, my voice screaming until it cracked. I blinked and I was back. No fire, just humiliation. Verena sighed. "Barbara, this is exactly the behavior we're trying to move past. This attitude is why you're alone." She turned toward the cake with a knife. I wiped my face with a cloth napkin. "You want me to sign over my house, but you never once gave me a room where I was safe." I grabbed my purse, turned, and walked to the door. Behind me, Isolde whispered. "Mom said she'd convince her." Verena's voice called out, saccharine and smug. "Barbara, don't walk away again. Be the bigger person." I turned just enough to look over my shoulder. I was always the bigger person. You just never looked down far enough to see me. The door slammed behind me. And suddenly, it felt like smoke again. But this time I was running toward air. The street was quiet. I was halfway to my car when I saw someone standing by the mailbox holding a piece of paper. She was holding a flyer, some neighborhood event printout half crumpled in her hand. I nodded politely, said nothing, and got in the car. My fingers trembled as I shut the door. The air inside was stale and heavy, the kind that clings to skin and memory. I didn't turn the engine on. I just sat there, palms resting on the steering wheel, trying to remember how to breathe like a person who hadn't just had birthday cake weaponized against her. My phone buzzed. One new message from Isolda. You always overreact. That's why Mom had to tell people you needed help. There it was. The script, the family's favorite monologue, rehearsed, repeated, and refined over the years until it sounded like truth. But the line between overreaction and reaction is paper thin when the fire never stopped. I stared out the windshield at the hydrangeas lining the curb. They were always her favorite. Pink because blue made her look tired. That's what Mom used to say. But in that moment, all I saw was a wall. Soft looking, but thick and rooted, just like the silence they'd cultivated. Without thinking, my hand reached for the glove compartment. Inside was a weathered envelope with my name scribbled in my own handwriting, years old, creased from moves and neglect. I opened it like I had done too many times before. Inside, a copy of the official fire department report, date, signed, and painfully specific. Victim was discovered unconscious in the basement. Entry required force through rear window. Door was locked from the outside. I exhaled so slowly it almost hurt. The report always made my hands stop shaking. It didn't comfort me. It confirmed me. There's a difference. The memory didn't wait for permission. It came like smoke. Fast, invasive, everywhere at once. It was summer. 14. The air conditioner had broken that day, and the house felt like it was exhaling heat with every breath. Dorian had dared me, his smirk as smug as it was careless. Bet you can't stay down there overnight. You're too soft, he said. And then the lock clicked. At first, I laughed. I thought it was a joke, a stupid prank. But then minutes passed. Then hours, then the smell started. Plastic, acid, and unnatural. I clawed at the door, my fingers raw. I screamed until my throat was sandpaper. I pounded until my knuckles bled. And then nothing. The next memory was blue. Blue fluorescent lights above a hospital bed. The antiseptic sting of saline. The quiet beep of monitors tracking a life that almost slipped away without anyone noticing. Verena sat beside me, calm as church. They said you panicked and locked yourself in, she whispered, brushing hair from my forehead. It's okay. These things happen. You're just sensitive. The doctor nodded. Didn't question it. A week later, the school counselor smiled gently and said, Your mother mentioned you have a vivid imagination. Let's work on staying grounded. And just like that, the rewrite began. Sitting in my car, I opened my phone and scrolled through Facebook posts from that year. Mom's update dated weeks after the fire read, Barbara has always been such a creative spirit. Trauma is complex. Grateful she's doing better. Dorian's post was worse. We forgive even when people lock themselves in basements and scare us all to death. Family's what matters. I didn't know whether to laugh or vomit. Maybe both. I whispered to myself. They didn't tell one lie. They built a whole library. The fire didn't erase me. It just gave them a clean page to write a version of me that fit better in their story. I looked at the report again, then back at the text, the posts, the carefully curated fiction. My hand hovered over the delete button, but I didn't press it. I wasn't going to erase the evidence like they had tried to erase me. Instead, I sent the fire report to a private email with the subject line, if they ever try again. That's when the phone rang, unknown number. I hesitated, picked it up. Miss Barbara, a woman's voice said. This is a ruse from down the street. We need to talk. I should have said something years ago. Arusa's voice cracked with guilt, but I kept mine steady. We talked for 20 minutes, her words painting the kind of truth I didn't know I needed. She'd seen the smoke from her kitchen. She called the fire department. She waited on the curb, yelling my name while my family remained inside, eating, talking, pretending. That night, I barely slept. I sat up, rereading the fire report until the numbers blurred into ghosts. Around 2 a.m., a text came in from an unknown contact. No name attached, just 5 words. I booked you with Dr. Clean. It was her. Verena had always had a thing for control dressed up as concern. The appointment was for 10:30 that morning. I should have cancelled, but curiosity can be a reckless thing, especially when you've been gaslit by professionals before. I figured if anything, I'd catch them in the act. The waiting room smelled like lavender and old carpet. It made my skin itch. I gave the receptionist my name and sat down across from a fish tank with no fish, just plastic plants swaying in a tiny artificial current. Dr. Clean's office was overdecorated, books he didn't read, degrees in frames, a sculpture that looked like something from a dentist's lobby. He smiled too fast, shook my hand too long. "Barbara, it's good you came." He didn't ask what brought me in. He opened a file already on his desk. My name was on the tab. "You're clearly articulate," he said within the first 5 minutes. "Your mother always said you were too smart for your own peace." I blinked. "She talks to you?" He nodded, unfazed. "Families have patterns. I like to understand the full landscape." I swallowed. "You mean she gave you a narrative?" He shrugged as if this was all standard protocol. "Only background to protect you." And there it was. I had walked into a trap disguised as a therapy session. I stared at the wall behind him where a painting of a river tried to convince me peace was possible in this room. I stood up. I don't need a couch to be professionally gaslit. I've had years of practice for free. He didn't stop me. I didn't slam the door. That's the thing about people who think they're in control. They never see you leave until you're already gone. I stepped into the hallway and nearly collided with Isolde. She was seated on one of the leather chairs in the waiting area, fiddling with her phone. Her hair was tied back, makeup undone. She looked like someone who hadn't been sleeping, or maybe just someone who had finally started seeing clearly. She glanced up, startled. "You, too?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "They used him on me when I left Aaron." I froze. She never talked about that breakup, just that it had ended and Mom said it was for the best. He was, she paused, dropped her voice. "He wasn't safe." My breath caught. "And they didn't believe you?" She shook her head. "Said I was being dramatic, that I had abandonment issues because of Dad leaving early." I studied her face. It wasn't makeup or tiredness. It was recognition and regret. "Back then, I thought you were just extra," she said. "But now, I see they script everything." I gave a half smile. "Takes guts to say that. Just don't let it stop there." I didn't wait for her reply. I walked out into the Sacramento sun, my breath coming easier than it had in days. Back in my car, I let the engine hum beneath me. I was halfway through composing an email to my attorney when my phone buzzed again. Voicemail, unknown number. I played it. Speaker on. "Ms. Barbara, I'm calling from Sacramento Property Records. There's been a recent request to alter the deed to your home." I played it again, slower this time. Someone was trying to erase me on paper. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, replaying the voicemail until the words imprinted in my bones. Alter the deed. The nerve. I hadn't even made it 24 hours from their last ambush before they tried to finish what they started. This time with paperwork. That night, after pacing the length of my apartment for what felt like hours, I collapsed onto the couch, laptop in my lap. I needed to understand just how far they were willing to go. That's when I opened the family group chat. My mother had just sent a message. "Look what I found." The photo from the day we almost lost Barbara. I clicked the link. The image loaded slowly like it knew it was about to hurt me. It showed Verena, Dorian, and Isolde standing outside the house, our old home. Their arms were stretched toward the camera, faces twisted in theatrical panic. Behind them, smoke billowed in a neat swirl above the roof. The caption read, "We screamed until she was pulled out." That day changed us all. Changed you? You never even showed up. My chest tightened. That day, I had been unconscious. I hadn't seen anyone's face. I only remembered waking up under fluorescent lights and being told the firemen were lucky to get me out in time. I zoomed in on the photo, their clothes, their expressions. Something felt off. The colors were too crisp. The shadows didn't match the smoke. I ran the image through a reverse search. Less than a minute later, I found it. Originally posted 2 years after the fire. A church picnic. Same outfits, same backdrop, but no smoke, no urgency, no screaming. They didn't just edit the truth. They manufactured a lie from a Sunday lunch. I whispered to myself, they didn't just rewrite history, they staged it. By the time the clock hit midnight, I knew what I had to do. I pulled on jeans, grabbed my keys, and drove to my storage unit just off Folsom Boulevard. The place smelled like dust and regret. I hadn't opened most of these boxes in years, but I knew exactly what I was looking for. Grandpa's old DVR. He used to say it was for keeping an eye on the garden. I knew better. That camera had been aimed at the basement door for a reason. The unit's back corner held a box labeled "Tools Don't Toss." Inside, beneath a nest of coaxial cables and expired batteries, was the black camera body, heavier than I remembered. I took it home, charged it overnight, and prayed the files hadn't corrupted. By dawn, the screen flickered to life. The interface was clunky, but the date filter worked. June 3, 14 years ago. The footage was grainy, grayscale, time-stamped. I skipped past hours of silence until a motion sensor alert blinked on the screen. There he was, Dorian, teenaged, grinning. He walked into frame, looked around, then pulled the basement door shut with both hands. The timestamp blinked, then he reached out and turned the lock. I pressed pause. My heart stopped just for a beat. I kept watching. 10 minutes later, the camera caught shadows flickering under the door. Smoke began to curl upward. The lower half of the frame danced with rising heat. No one came. Then, my hands banging from the inside, my fists slamming against the wood. Still, no one came. I watched that version of me disappear behind the camera's final frame, and something inside me settled. Not like peace, like proof. I saved the clip in 3 formats, uploaded one to a secure drive, emailed another to myself under the subject line in case they deny me again. They say the camera doesn't lie. I wish I'd believed that sooner. Before they convinced me, I imagined everything. Later that morning, I reopened the doctored photo. My finger hovered over the download icon. Just one last save before I deleted it from the chat just to remind myself what I was up against. A notification flashed at the top of the screen. Verena just shared this photo in a public post. Tagged Dorian, Isolde, and Barbara. I clicked view post. First comment. So brave. You all should be proud of how you protected her. I stared at it, then closed the laptop. I wasn't protected, I said to the quiet room. I was packaged. The image of that fake photo still burned behind my eyes as I drove. I didn't remember starting the engine or pulling out of the apartment complex. I just knew I had to go back to the house, not as their daughter, but as the legal owner with something to say. It was early afternoon by the time I pulled up to 184 Riverside Lane. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had finally grown into the woman who no longer needed to shrink herself to fit inside it. I stepped out of the car, the manila envelope tucked under my arm, and rang the doorbell. A few seconds later, Verena opened the door. Her expression flickered from surprise to irritation and under her breath. "What are you doing here?" she asked, voice flat. I didn't bother answering her question. "We need to talk." Dorian appeared in the hallway behind her, arms folded like a bouncer. Isolde peeked from the stairs, but didn't say a word. "I'm not here to cause trouble," I said calmly. "But you all seem to have forgotten something. The house is in my name. And while I'm not kicking anyone out today, I will be heard." Verena crossed her arms. "No more theatrics, Barbara. You need to leave." My jaw clenched, the envelope crinkled in my grip. "I'll make it easy," I replied. "Show me to my room. I'll grab what's left of my things and go." They didn't stop me. The hallway was the same, still lined with those fake floral prints Verena insisted looked timeless. I opened the door to my old bedroom. It smelled like old carpet and other people's decisions. Half the space had been converted into storage. But there in the far corner was the suitcase. Still packed, still dusty, just as I had left it the night I was forced out at 19. I pulled it out, the wheels squeaking like they hadn't moved in years. I walked it down the hallway toward the front door. As I passed the living room window, I noticed our neighbor, Mrs. Langley, watering her plants. Verena stepped outside and called out to her, smiling sweetly. "Barbara's going through another one of her dramatic spells." I stopped in the driveway, turned just enough to be heard. "I'm not dramatic," I said clearly. "I'm detailed." "There's a difference." The suitcase hit the trunk with a thud. I didn't look back. I drove straight to Tina's house on the other side of town. She met me on the porch, arms crossed, but soft-eyed. "I've got space in the garage," she said. "It's hot, but it's yours." I didn't need more than that. The space was barely wide enough to fit a car and a workbench. Boxes of tax forms and tools lined the walls, but it was mine for now. I set up a makeshift desk using an old folding table, my laptop, and a desk lamp held together with duct tape. Over the next few days, I did what I had always done when life broke a bone. I started building something stronger around the scar. I sent out proposals, reached out to an old contact who now worked at a small California-based startup. 3 days later, I landed a UX contract. I rented a P.O. box so they couldn't trace my address, filed a business name with the state, and for the first time in years, I was starting something entirely mine. One evening, Tina walked in while I was hunched over wireframes, the overhead bulb swaying in rhythm with the fan. "You ever take a breath?" she asked, arms folded. I grinned faintly. "Rest is for people who aren't one lie away from being erased." She sat on a paint can, exhaling slowly. "You're not running away, you know. You're building your own hallway." I nodded. That line stuck with me longer than it should have. Later that night, after Tina went to bed, I opened my email. Subject: Potential buyer list, 184, Riverside Lane. I froze. I opened the attachment. Verena was trying to sell the house, my house, without so much as a conversation. The listed broker, same agent she used when she transferred Grandpa's cabin to Dorian years ago under the guise of simplifying estate logistics. Some people fake memories, some fake ownership, but I never thought they'd try to sell my name. The next morning, I didn't brew coffee. I didn't check the weather. I drove straight to the Sacramento County Recorder's office before my pulse had a chance to slow down. My inbox still held the listing email, and I'd printed the PDF at a FedEx store at 7 on the dot. A name was circled in red. Same broker Verena used when she quietly handed Dorian Grandpa's lake cabin. History was not just repeating, it was being Xeroxed. Inside the county building, the clerk behind the glass partition tapped her keyboard like she was trying to break it. "Address?" she asked. 184, Riverside Lane, I said. My voice was steady, but my jaw was tense. She nodded, clicked again, and squinted at her screen. "Looks like a recent motion's been filed to amend historical ownership. Says you relinquished claim voluntarily due to mental health concerns." I blinked. "What?" She turned the monitor slightly. "It's notarized. Effective last Friday." I stepped back, heat crawling up my neck. "That's a forged signature. I never signed anything, and I sure as hell didn't relinquish anything." She handed me a printout. I read the language aloud, voice shaking only slightly. "This confirms the removal of Barbara, last name, from all rights, claim, or access to the property at 184, Riverside Lane." Same phrasing they used the night they packed up my stuff in a single suitcase and told me, "You're not welcome here." They hadn't disinherited me today. They just finally put it on paper. I took the document, folded it carefully, and walked out without saying another word. I didn't go back to Tina's garage. I didn't go to the co-working cafe where I usually built wireframes and answered client emails. I drove to a quiet spot near 19th and L, parked in front of the Red Maple Cafe, and waited. At 11:15, Aruz walked in. She looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was age, or maybe it was the weight of silence finally sitting too long in her bones. "Thanks for coming," I said, pulling out a chair. She sat slowly, setting a manila folder on the table. "I was your neighbor the day of the fire. I saw everything." Her hands trembled around a cup of black coffee. "I heard the banging. I heard you screaming. I was the one who called 911. Not your mother, not your brother. No one was outside when the trucks came. They were still in the house when the firefighters broke in." She pushed the folder toward me. Inside was a copy of her statement, an incident report she had filed back then and never followed up on. I swallowed hard. "Why didn't you say anything?" She hesitated. "Your mom told people you weren't well, said you made things up, that you had episodes." I nodded, not surprised. "I didn't speak up because I thought maybe she was protecting you. Maybe I misunderstood." I looked her dead in the eye. I've heard worse from people who looked me in the eye and said they loved me. Tears welled in her eyes. It was wrong. I should have done more. I closed the folder gently. "You did enough. You remembered." We sat in silence for a minute, long enough for me to realize how much this meant and how little it changed what had already been done. As I left the cafe, I opened the folder again. Tucked behind the report was something I hadn't seen. A call log timestamped from the morning of the fire. First caller ID, Aruza's landline, not Verena, not Dorian, not anyone from the family. My phone buzzed just as I reached my car. Email from Dorian. Subject, "Let's be civil. You're embarrassing yourself." I didn't reply right away. I just stared at the screen. Then I whispered, "You haven't seen embarrassment, but you're about to." By the time I hit reply on Dorian's email, I already had the fire report, Aruza's signed statement, and the call log ready to go. But I didn't send them. Not yet. I didn't need words. I needed action. And I knew exactly where to start. That Thursday morning, I walked into the real estate office downtown wearing jeans, a black t-shirt, and the kind of stillness that made receptionists nervous. My attorney, Randall, met me in the lobby with a manila folder already in hand. "Everything's prepared," he said quietly. "We close in 15 minutes. The office smelled like fresh paint and overcharged toner. A place built for erasing the past with just enough polish to look official. The seller's agent never showed. It didn't matter." Randall slid the documents across the table. I signed every page with a calm that didn't match the firestorm I felt inside. When it was done, the receptionist handed me the keys. "Funny," she said, half laughing. "The seller never asked who was buying." I tucked the keys into my purse and smiled. "That's why I paid cash." Afterward, I stopped by a locksmith on Franklin, asked for the quietest deadbolt they had. Then I filed the eviction notice. Lease termination effective 30 days from delivery. Legal, clean, final. I didn't even bother driving straight home. I parked 4 houses down from Riverside Lane and waited. I watched from the shadow of my rearview mirror as Verena opened the front door around 8 p.m. She wore her hair up, wine glass in one hand, phone in the other. She stepped outside to grab a package, probably some overpriced candle she'd use once and gift later when her eyes landed on the notice taped to the doorframe. Even from the car, I saw her freeze, read, then read again. The glass dropped. Dorian appeared behind her, barefoot, shirtless, with a box labeled "for storage" in his arms. He shouted loud enough for the whole street to hear. "She can't do this." Inside the car, I whispered. "I already did. I didn't linger. I didn't need to." Their screams were loud enough to echo long after I drove off. Back at Tina's garage, the air felt warmer than usual. I sat on the edge of the cot holding the new keys like a rosary. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I placed them in a drawer, turned the lock, and walked away. I didn't win. That word never fit right anyway. What I did was reclaim inch by inch, breath by breath. No music, no celebration, just quiet. The kind that doesn't need an audience to be true. The next morning, I checked my P.O. box before heading to a coffee shop downtown. One small package, no return address. Inside, a flash drive. That was it. No note, no context, but the label. Truth. Finally, I went home, made tea, and sat at my laptop. I plugged in the drive. The first file blinked to life. Fire Night voicemail. I clicked on the file, and for a moment, there was nothing but static. Like the drive needed a second to remember how to breathe. Then her voice came through. Clear, direct, chilling. Don't let anyone in that room until I say she needs to know what it's like. It was Verena, sharp, calculated, talking to someone. Maybe Dorian. Maybe someone else. I didn't recognize the other voice, but it didn't matter. That line. She needs to know what it's like. I sat there letting the words settle into the spaces my memories had tried to seal off. There were other files. A scanned letter from Uncle Ephraim confessing that Verena had threatened to cut him out of the family completely if he spoke up about the fire. And a photo timestamped. There I was, limp, soot-covered, being carried out by a firefighter. And behind me, no one, no Dorian, no Verena, no one. There was the match. And now the flame. The next morning, I got dressed in silence and drove straight to the courthouse. I didn't wear anything special, just a gray blazer and black slacks. I didn't need to look strong. I just needed to look like someone who had nothing left to prove. The clerk at the front desk glanced up. Back again. I nodded, filing a motion. Evidence for an injunction. They're trying to sell a house that belongs to me. She recognized my name. She didn't ask for details. You know, she said softly. They've already filed a countersuit. Emotional distress, defamation. I almost laughed. They better have tissues in court. By noon, I had turned in the full packet. Fire report, Aruza's sworn statement, call logs, photos, and now the voicemail. Randall, my attorney, said we'd get an emergency hearing by Friday. That gave them just enough time to think they still had a shot. Friday came fast. The courtroom was cold with that stale institutional air that seemed to cling to unresolved truth. I sat at the front flanked by Randall and a paralegal. Verena walked in wearing navy, her expression pinched and polished. Dorian followed, chewing gum like it was a defense strategy. The judge entered. We stood. We sat. And then the surprise. Your Honor, Randall said. We'd like to call a witness, someone not listed in the original filing. The judge narrowed her eyes. You understand the risk? We do. The bailiff opened the side door. Chief Armando Mendez stepped through. Former fire captain, retired 10 years now, still upright, still focused. He took the stand, placed a thick hand on the Bible, and sat. I pulled the girl out myself, he said. Back then, it wasn't my place to speak, but that doesn't mean I forgot. Verena objected. Her lawyer said the testimony was irrelevant. The judge raised a hand. I'll allow it. Mendez leaned forward. We got the call from a neighbor. No one from that house called us. No one was outside yelling. We broke the basement window. We dragged her out while the family sat in the living room. The room was silent. Verena looked straight ahead. Dorian bounced his leg under the table. Isolde was in the back, hands clasped in her lap, eyes red. The judge looked over the files, nodded slowly, then said, if what has been presented here is true, there may be grounds for criminal charges. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. I stood and left the courtroom without looking at Verena. I didn't need to see her face. I already knew what lived behind it. Outside, the sun was blinding. A half-dozen reporters swarmed the sidewalk, questions flying, microphones thrust forward. I walked straight through them. No words, no answers. At the corner, my phone buzzed. A message from Thurman, my father. You win, it read. But there's something in the will you don't know. I stared at the screen. I didn't need to win. I needed the world to stop believing their version. But what he said next made me realize the story still had one secret left to tell. I didn't call him back right away. I waited until Saturday morning, then met Thurman at a modest legal office, tucked behind a row of fast food chains and dry cleaners. The kind of place no one noticed unless they had paperwork or regrets. He looked older. Not old, just worn, the way people do when they've spent decades keeping their spine straight while someone else steered. We sat across from each other at the conference table. He didn't try to hug me. That was something. You were left off the original trust, he said, sliding a file across to me. Your mother told the attorneys you'd voluntarily surrendered your share during your recovery. That word, he avoided my eyes. She forged your signature, said it was to avoid complications. I didn't speak, just let the silence bloom like a bruise between us. And Dorian, he paused, voice catching. He drained almost everything. Gambling, bad crypto investments. He even took out loans in my name. I didn't know until the collection started. I opened the file, saw my name omitted in perfect legal font. He didn't fall, I said finally. You all patted the ground until the patting caught fire. Thurman didn't respond. Maybe because he knew there was nothing left to say. That same afternoon, local news ran a short segment about a subpoena issued for Dorian. Wire fraud, estate misuse. I watched it from the corner of a sandwich shop. My phone propped against a salt shaker. He looked tired in the footage. Not sorry, just tired. His social post later read, "People betray you when you give too much. I regret trusting everyone." I almost laughed. Funny, I muttered to myself. I regret not seeing through you sooner. 2 days later, I returned to the family house. My house. I parked in the back, unlocked the gate, and stepped into the yard. The grass was overgrown, but not wild, just forgotten. I walked toward the deck. That's when I heard it. A soft shuffle. And then from under the wooden steps emerged a shape I hadn't seen in years. Milo, the family cat, old and stiff-legged, with a torn ear and eyes still too wide for his face. He limped toward me slowly, cautiously. Then, without hesitation, nudged his head into my palm. You remember me, huh? I whispered, kneeling down. He purred softly, circling once before settling beside my feet. No one had told him what to think. No one rewrote me in his mind. He just remembered. And that more than court filings or witness statements broke me in a way that finally felt clean. I sat on the deck for a while with Milo, watching the sun shift across the fence. A breeze came through. For once, it didn't feel like warning. It felt like permission. In the days that followed, something strange happened. Emails from people I never expected. My fourth-grade teacher, a neighbor who once told me to keep my music down, even an old friend from church. I'm sorry. I should have asked what happened. We didn't know. We just believed her. I didn't write back, but I printed every message, taped them up along the back wall of my new home office, just above the window where the light came in softest. Not forgiveness, just evidence of awakening. Then came the voicemail. Unfamiliar number, no introduction, just her voice. Verena, you may have the house, she said. You may even win, but I will never say I was wrong. Never. I closed my eyes and whispered, you just did. The day of the will reading came with heavy skies, thick, gray, undecided whether to break open or hold their grief a little longer. I walked into the legal office alone, but not empty. I carried silence like armor now. Inside, Isolde sat near the corner of the room. She didn't look up, didn't wave, just clutched a tissue in her lap like it was the last apology she had left. Verena entered 5 minutes late, sunglasses on despite the dim light. Her lips were pursed so tight they looked stapled shut. Dorian didn't show. The lawyer, a calm man with thin glasses and an overused yellow legal pad, cleared his throat. Thank you all for being here. This is the updated reading of the family, name, trust and property allocation as amended 2 weeks ago. He looked at me first. To Barbara. We reinstate her full property and estate share based on new evidence presented. He didn't need to elaborate. Everyone in the room already knew what that meant. To Dorian, the trust is suspended pending investigation. Verena opened her mouth, but he cut her off. There is more. He unfolded a single page, read slowly, deliberately. It's a letter from Ephraim, last name, submitted posthumously. In his words, I witnessed the family deliberately exclude Barbara from the trust. Verena told me, and I quote, "She needs to be taught she's not indispensable. That's the only way she'll shut up." The room didn't gasp. The silence did. Isolde turned away, wiping her face. Verena said nothing. I said one word quietly. Finally. Afterward, I found Thurman outside near the parking lot, standing alone in a patch of early afternoon sun. He held a worn manila folder in both hands like it might float away if he let go. "I owe you this," he said, handing it to me. Inside were property records, signed deeds, notarized forms. "These are the papers, the ones I signed to sell your grandparents' lake cabin to cover Dorian's rehab and restitution." I flipped through the documents. My name was on the title. "You didn't ask," I said, "not a question." He lowered his head. "Your mother said you wouldn't care, that you wouldn't know. You didn't even look at me and ask." He didn't defend himself, just nodded like someone who finally understood what accountability tastes like when there's no salt to sugarcoat it. We walked in silence toward the bus depot a few blocks away. He was leaving town, staying with a cousin up north. No one had asked him to. No one had stopped him. We sat on the wooden bench as a bus pulled in. He watched the doors open, then looked at me. "I didn't know how to father you," he said. "You scared me. You still do." It wasn't cruel. It was the closest he'd ever come to the truth. I nodded. "That's the closest thing to truth I've ever heard from you." He boarded without turning back. I didn't wave. Later that evening, I walked home. The rain had started, soft, insistent, like it had been holding back for years, and finally got permission. As I reached the porch, I noticed something wedged into the doorframe. A single sheet of notebook paper. No envelope. The handwriting was familiar, slanted, rushed. "I'm sorry. I should have stood up earlier. Isolde." I folded it once, slid it into my coat pocket. Then I noticed the manila envelope beneath it. Official, sealed. A court subpoena filed by Verena claiming emotional damages. I didn't sigh. I didn't curse. I just stood there letting the rain soak through my sleeves, thinking one thought as clear as glass. They weren't finished. But neither was I. A month passed like a door swinging shut. Slow at first, then final. The lawsuit didn't disappear, but it stalled. My attorney filed the right papers. The subpoena never reached trial. Maybe Verena realized how little sympathy there was left for her. Or maybe she finally accepted that the audience she once played to had turned their chairs. The morning of the center's opening arrived cool and still. I stood outside the renovated house, my house, though I no longer called it that, and read the plaque bolted near the front steps, "Layla's Light, Center for Recovery and Rebirth." They asked if I would live in it, I told a reporter earlier that week. But some places aren't meant to be homes again. They're meant to be starting lines. The front yard was filled with folding chairs, a podium, and people I didn't expect. Local officials, teachers, volunteers, women from shelters, mothers, daughters. Tina wore a navy blazer and stood behind the reception desk, clipboard in hand. Milo slept on the window ledge, tail flicking in slow circles. I adjusted the mic and took a deep breath. As I stepped toward the ribbon, the breeze lifted my sleeve just enough. A child in the front row pointed at my wrist and whispered to her mom. Someone asked gently, "What does that mean?" They were referring to the 3 small black dots tattooed on the inside of my wrist. I smiled. 3 days, I said. Basement, silence, survival. I never forgot. Now I make sure others don't have to. Applause rose. Not loud, not showy, but real. I didn't feel proud. I felt present. Across the street, a car door shut. I turned subtly. Verena stood near the sidewalk, her posture tight, eyes shaded beneath sunglasses she no longer needed. Dorian hovered a few steps behind her, thinner, worn. They didn't cross over. They just stood and watched. A young reporter approached with a notepad. Verena shook her head and stepped back. Dorian said something low, maybe to her, maybe to himself. She made this about her. And from the edge of the crowd, Isolde stepped beside him and answered without looking at either of them. No, she made it about healing. We just weren't invited. Inside the center, the ceremony gave way to quiet conversations, laughter over coffee, hands tracing old photos of other survivors now mentors. I wandered the hall slowly. The paint was fresh, but the walls still remembered. I touched the doorknob of the basement. It was unlocked. I opened it. The stairs were carpeted. Lights gently glowed down the railings. At the bottom, cushions, art supplies, a low bookcase full of journals. I stood in the doorway and whispered, I was never weak. I was waiting. Then I locked the door, not to keep anyone in, but because the day was done. Later that night, I turned off the lights room by room, my footsteps soft on the hardwood. When I reached the front door, I paused and looked back at the quiet hallway. I didn't reclaim the house, I said softly to the dark. I reclaimed the silence and I filled it with my